We can continue now with our next presenter, who will also be our final presenter on the panel. We have Amal Rizvi, who is a third year in Western University in Ajax, Ontario. She's studying biology. She also works part-time in sociocultural anthropology research. So here she is with disability studies in the context of COVID-19.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amal, and I'm going to be presenting about disability studies in the context of COVID-19. So let's just jump straight into a brief introduction on some key terms like disability, disability studies, and the emergence of disability culture during COVID-19. So, a lot of people define disability in different ways, depending on a lot of factors like personal experiences and interactions with others. So, when I study socioculture anthropology part time, we kind of break it down into three major pillars. The first one being that disability sort of arises with when your impairments interact with the environment. So, different people experience different levels of impairment, different degrees of impairments, different types of impairments. For example, we have sensory impairments, motion impairments, we have intellectual or cognitive impairments, physical impairments, all different types of impairments. And so when disability interacts with, when impairments interact with the environment, that's when disability sort of becomes prominent in the social lens. A second point to sort of understand is that different environments are going to give rise to kind of different perspectives of disability. So we all come from different environments, we all have different cultures, relationships, and lifestyle choices. And all of these things come together to forge our environment, which is kind of what defines the disability experience for someone. And that's why somebody else's experience with a given disability might be totally different from others. And lastly, disability is a very personal and public experience. So, as one of my favorite authors, Dan Goodley, says, part of disability studies and understanding it is to understand that disableism needs to be shifted from a personal predicament to a social pathology. So, basically, what that means is that although disability is defined by our personal environment and by somebody's personal experiences, it's also a very public thing because to be disabled is to, in today's climate, it's to be politicized. So those are sort of 3 points to keep in mind when talking about disability. So disability studies, by that logic, is a sphere of influence that intertwines the personal experiences of people with disabilities with research theory and advocacy. It opposes the idea that disability equates to human failure, and it examines disableism, which is defined by when people with disabilities are restricted by barriers. These barriers arise when people with disabilities do pursue their passions and do pursue things that people who don't identify with disabilities pursue, like education, transportation, communication. And this gives rise to disability culture, which is more or less the encapsulation of the disability experience, embodied in art, music, performances, literature, poetry, and various other forms, with the fundamental core message that, of inclusivity and that disability does not equate to human failure. So, in the context of COVID 19, I sort of wanted to talk about this, examining it through somewhat of a sociocultural lens. And I think that this perspective is really important because it's something that we don't really think about and it targets the issue in a very systematic way. So to kind of examine it in this way, we sort of have to examine it in three layers, which I've kind of condensed to IOU. I being to number one, identify disparities and gaps in disability inclusive healthcare. O being to observe how disability culture captures these disparities and gaps, and U being to understand society's response and disability culture strengthening in retaliation to these to these times we're in right now. So step number one, identify would be to identify all of these disparities and gaps in disability inclusive healthcare that we don't seem to be meeting. So I've highlighted three major ones. The first one being Number one, that preventative measures don't really account for the care that a lot of people who identify with disabilities need. For example, social distancing and washing your hands isn't really enough for some people. Some people might require living in group homes or nursing homes, and it's not quite so easy to live in isolationism when you're in a situation like that. Some people need care or aides coming to their homes and working one on one with them to carry out their daily tasks. So these preventative measures that we're sort of perpetrating in our media don't exactly account for this, and that's a problem that we need to solve. The second gap that we have is the providers don't necessarily account for comorbidities. Since people who identify with disabilities are disproportionately more likely to experience comorbidities or other health conditions like heart disease, respiratory issues, etc., that really change the game in terms of COVID-19 related healthcare. Healthcare providers are glossing over this and not understanding that COVID-19 isn't quite only COVID-19 for a lot of people who experience disabilities. And lastly, we have inequalities in access to information. For example, a lot of people with disability don't necessarily own a computer or a laptop or a tablet or a TV, and it's not easy to access information. How do we expect people with hearing impairments to access information that people who don't have hearing impairments access? How do we expect blind people to access information equally? We don't think of these things when we're creating our emergency planning and disability inclusive healthcare. Step number two is to observe how disability culture captures these disparities. And I've divided this up into advocacy and expression. So starting off with advocacy, a lot of disability advocates, as well as disabled people, have created petitions recently, in fact, petitions for things such as disability inclusive measures like transparent masks. Transparent masks, for example, are extremely important. People who are deaf, who read lips, they can't read lips if the mask isn't letting them. So, transparent masks are speaking out candidly about these issues and speaking out about the shortcomings of our current society and how we sort of approach these healthcare measures. And the second part to disability culture is expression. This is expression through media like art and music. For example, the Indefinite Arts Center in Calgary, Alberta, has donated several hundreds of art kits to disabled artists after much petitioning and after much sort of understanding that disabled artists still need to make art. People still need to express themselves in this way, and a pandemic shouldn't be preventing them from doing that. Poetry is also a really big one. One of my favorite poets, Flora Aguasa, I believe, just wrote a poem, COVID-19, Leave the World Now, that encompasses a lot of her experiences with the current COVID-19 pandemic as a disabled woman. So both of these sides of disability culture, advocacy and expression, definitely come together to really help us observe how disability culture is capturing these disparities, even if we don't necessarily see it ourselves in our common, more dominant culture. And a quote that I've put on the screen that sort of encapsulate this is, disabled artists are far from monolithic. They occupy every race, class, gender, and sexuality and use every artistic medium to express themselves. And lastly, I want to sort of tie this all up with the U portion of IOU. So U is for understand, as in understanding society's response and disability culture's strengthening in retaliation to this COVID-19 pandemic. So first I'm going to talk about some of the key takeaways. In my opinion, the key takeaway is that we have a lot of work to do in terms of how we approach disability inclusive healthcare. It seems that our current approach has a lot of shortcomings. But if you think about it, are they really shortcomings if we keep doing it over and over and over again? History definitely repeats itself. For example, in the 1900s, when polio virus was huge, a lot of people experienced these same issues with polio leaving so many people disabled, and discrimination between people of different ethnic groups, people of different lifestyles, etc., etc. We also need to examine evident gaps in the current response, which I talked about a little bit earlier, but more importantly, we talk about non-evident gaps in the current response. We can't speak on behalf of people who have disabilities. All we can do is listen and examine what the non-evident gaps are that we ourselves might not notice, but clearly we're overlooking over and over and over again, and examine why do these disparities and gaps even exist. So, for example, the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit provides over $500 more to non-disabled people than the disability benefits the Canadian government gives due to the pandemic. So it's interesting to see why, if both people, a disabled person and a non disabled person, are not working, why does the non disabled person get more money? Like, what is the thought process here? And it's that thought process that needs to be attacked from the ground up so that we can sort of attack this issue as a whole and sort of delve deeper into disability studies. And that's about it. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.
That was awesome. Thank you, Amal. We also have a couple of questions for Amal. Kind of. There's two very similar questions, so I'm just going to ask all of it the way that it was typed, and if you want more explanation to the question, just let me know. So the questions being, do you think if the government takes more initiative to be further inclusive to disabled people, the rest of society will follow, or do people need to take that initiative upon themselves? Further, is there a way to directly fight against negative politicization?
As for the first question about whether the government needs to take more initiative or it's up to the rest of society, I think it's definitely, like many of these types of situations, it's definitely a combination of both. But I think that it's something where the government needs to be made aware, but it's never the responsibility of disabled people per se, because that's kind of what disability culture almost is. It's the expression of the experiences and collective struggle of the disabled community, through their way of expressing it, which is art, poetry, and other forms of media. So it has been expressed, and I do think, however, that it's something that our higher ups and our government does need to take seriously, because the current trend seems to be that things like this are addressed. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the government has provided a disability benefit, but there's a very obvious difference in the normal COVID-19 disability benefit versus CESB or CERB. So it's kind of more of a matter of not necessarily saying the government needs to take action, but more understanding where the thought process is coming from, like why this specific action is being taken, and if the government or if higher ups making these decisions even understand, or even understand the shortcomings, because the shortcomings are very evident, but it's definitely a matter of understanding why these shortcomings exist, because is someone's life worth more because they have an ability that somebody else doesn't? Obviously not. So we need to address that problem in our higher ups. And as yeah, so as for the second part of that, the in the same way, our culture does seem to have somewhat of a negative political stigma, and to directly fight against this negative politicization, I think it's definitely just a matter of spreading awareness and also including more disability inclusive aspects in our normal day to day life. For example, transparent masks for people with hearing impairments to read lips. We want to get to a point where that's sort of just right there. Like that's not even like a question of people having to fight for that. It should just be obvious that some people have hearing impairments and need to read lips. Or even aside from the COVID-19 context, if you think about it, ramps or elevators or other forms of transportation or motor avenues for people to um, transport themselves by, those need to definitely be more prominent. And it shouldn't be a question of it. One day we want to get to a point where it shouldn't be a question of asking. It should be a question of, here it is. We thought about you already. Like, no problem. So, yeah, I hope that somewhat answers both of those questions.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you. Zach had a follow-up to that as well, actually. How do we help promote advocacy and expression of disabled persons in the mainstream so that it is not sidelined by the culture? Will this help the government understand disabled persons so they can make better policies?
This is actually a question that I've thought about before, but in terms of helping promote advocacy and expression in the mainstream so that it's not sidelined, I think it's a matter of understanding that we sort of have so there's a disability culture, and then we have our dominant, more common culture, right? And so there's like a lot of debate among a lot of people who do disability studies and among sociocultural anthropologists as to whether disability culture is part of the common culture, or if disability culture is a retaliation to not being a part of the common culture. So there's definitely different lenses to approach that. But if we were to go with the perspective that disability culture is a retaliation to not being a part of the common culture, then we definitely need to sort of promote disability culture by just literally, honestly, it's just a matter of inclusivity. It's unfortunate the answer is so simple, but that's usually how it is for a lot of these types of problems where we really just need to promote inclusivity. We need to put disabled artists out there. It's interesting how when we look at the art and media that we're consuming every single day, we're not really evident if the artists that we're consuming media from are disabled, we're not really aware of that. And maybe that's something that needs to change. Promoting disabled artists, promoting disabled film producers, singers, poets, etc., and celebrating them not only for the fact that they're artists, just like abled artists, but also celebrating them for the fact that they're unique and they have this thing that makes them a little bit different, but that's not something that holds them back. It's something to be celebrated, and it's something that really shows through their art and their creation. So just promoting that and just promoting the differences in their artwork and their creations can definitely help integrate that into the common culture and making the rest of society very well aware and immersed in disability culture as a whole, because the more immersed we are, the more people will definitely understand, and the more people understand, the more our higher ups are going to understand and have make that automatic connection down the line that yes, we need transparent masks, yes, we need ramps, yes, we need elevators. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was very clear. Thank you, Amal.